Hello, everyone. This is Mark Vina with More Insights and Strategy. Today is Monday, April 20th, 2020. I am here in good old San Jose, California, and I can't even remember what lockdown day we're in right now, but I think it's 52 or 53, and I am tired. I want to get the heck out of my house and get into the public domain and actually see people, and I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel. I hope everyone's families are safe and well. And I've got a great podcast in store for everyone today. I've got a person who I know quite well, a person who I met about, 4 or 5 years ago, Fahri.
I think so.
Fahri Diner, the CEO and head of Plume, which is probably one of the most exciting companies I've been associated with over the last few years as a client of Moor Insights. Fahri, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Mark. Good to see you. Well, first of all, I hope you're safe and sound as well. Good to talk to you. Good to see you. Yeah, I'm the founder and CEO of Plume. It's interesting times, definitely.
Yes, you can say that the least.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, and we, by way of the business that we're in, we tend to be kind of in the thick of all of this. We're seeing what's going on as people are working from home and so on. So there's some really interesting insights we've been able to develop.
Yeah, so I definitely want to I want to dive into that. So, Fahri, you have a very rich background from a startup pedigree standpoint. You've been involved in a number of different companies. Plume is just the latest example of a company that you really have put on the map. It's a bit of a different company than some of the companies you've dealt with in the past. But let's talk a little bit about your background and kind of, what got you intrigued about the wireless space. Let's just start with that for a second.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a bit of a different company, but there are a lot of similarities. I come from the kind of the good old telecommunications world. I've been involved in bringing broadband to the homes. I used to work on undersea networks at Pirelli. We used to design these submarine cables and networks, transatlantic, trans-Pacific type of networks underneath the Mediterranean Sea, etc. I've been involved in long distance fiber optic communications. These are, think of networks that are from New York to LA over fiber optic cables. Then the industry calls it kind of the metropolitan networks. And then there's the last mile.
Right.
You may have heard the term. People talk about the last mile, which tends to be kind of the most difficult part of bringing broadband to the home. Long way of saying, I've spent my entire career in bringing broadband to people to the home. But then, I really appreciate what happens, all the magic that has to happen on the back end, whether it's the routers and switches or transmission networks, etc., to bring ourselves this reliable broadband. About 5 years ago, I've come to this realization that all that magic, everything that happens falls apart at your gateway, your cable modem or fiber ONT. Because the network now doesn't end at your cable modem. The end of the network are the devices that you and I are speaking on. It's the PCs, it's the phones, it's the cameras. So the last mile problem has really had become the last 2 meters or 3 meter problem, if you know what I mean, inside the home. And that network is largely Wi-Fi. It's unlicensed spectrum, and it's a undeterministic medium. So it's a very difficult one to deal with versus dealing with transmission in fiber optic networks. In the fiber optic communications world, the glass fiber, the medium doesn't really change. The attenuation of the fiber, the dispersion that causes signal degradation doesn't really change. Whereas in wireless, particularly in unlicensed spectrum, there are a lot of things. Devices come and go. The interference comes and goes. So it's very much a dynamic environment. So that's the part that's different. But for me, the wireless communications inside the home is an extension of that global broadband network. But it's just as important. Arguably, you could say it's more important than many, the other parts, because that's the part the consumer interfaces with, if you know what I mean.
Well, so what's interesting about that is that that background obviously set you up in such a great way to establish a company like Plume, you know, wireless connectivity has always been kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of thing, in that, you know, once you have wireless and you enjoy the freedom that wireless provides you with all the different devices you have in your home, it's a magnificent experience. The Hyde part of the dynamic is that in many cases, and of course the ISPs are generally on the front line of all this, it can be a horrible situation if, for whatever reason, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is that if you can't enjoy that wireless connectivity with your devices all the time, whether it's interference with other devices, streaming sometimes plays havoc when multiple people are doing the same thing in the home. Then you have that, you know, in the last probably 10 years or so, online gaming has happened in a big way. And, you know, hardcore gamers, they get frustrated if they don't have a really good experience. And, you know, wireless is a key component to that. So in many ways, I mean, I think you kind of, and that's really what I want to kind of get into, is that, you know, the capability that you guys have at Plume with your technology is wonderful from an implementation standpoint. And I don't want to lowball that, but I do want to mention the fact that I think you were one of the first people to recognize is that the pain points that the ISPs were having, frankly, from a delivery mechanism standpoint. So let's talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
You bet. So, as I mentioned, wireless, the Wi-Fi network that is largely in our homes today is an extension of their broadband infrastructure. So they have to take it seriously. When Plume started, there were other companies who recognized that, hey, Wi-Fi in our homes is not great, right? But a lot of people saw the problem in one dimension. That dimension that the consumer easily sees is coverage. In other words, people say, yeah, Wi-Fi in my office where you're sitting right now is really good, but when I go up into the attic or down into the basement, it doesn't work very well. So people saw this challenge in the home in one dimension, which is in space. But in reality, for the reasons that you've also explained, Mark, the problem is a three-dimensional problem. You have to solve it in space, which means give me more coverage, more connectivity in every corner of my home. You can do that by putting these mesh extenders or pods, we call them, various places, make sure they talk to each other. It's not that difficult, that part of it, in a way. But the second dimension is not your wireless experience or your Wi-Fi, your connectivity experience has to work in every corner of your home, yes, but it also has to work all of the time. There's a time dimension. Because wireless is an undeterministic medium, as we discussed, you have to respond dynamically and often predictively and preemptively to the changing environment. This is the reason why Plume invented this concept of adaptive Wi-Fi. We don't talk about it just mesh coverage. We're adaptive. We're responding to interference. We're responding to the devices coming on and off of the network in real time. And because we're a cloud-based system, we also learn patterns and behaviors and be able to set the network and prepare it for a set of load that we're anticipating. And that load is the third dimension. So your Wi-Fi has to work in every corner of the home. We all agree. It has to work all of the time. You want it to work all the time, not just sometimes. It also has to work across a broad set of loads. What I mean by that is different devices have different network needs from the network.
Correct, right.
For example, your Apple TV, a 4K TV session, let's say, requires, if you give that device a 20 to 25 megabits per second of sustained throughput, your experience is probably going to be pretty good. Whereas this session that we're on, a video session, where we don't really need a lot of throughput, but we're sensitive to things like latency or packet loss. Okay, so we have a different network. We have a different demand from the network in terms of packet loss, for example. Whereas somebody else could be gaming upstairs, its latency might be the main determinant of that experience. So the concept of adaptive Wi-Fi is to respond to these loads and the devices and the sessions, what they need dynamically on the fly as we need them. So that's the reason why our approach to solving the Wi-Fi problem once and for all in the home was to really bring everything up, take this control plane up onto the cloud, which is really the switchboard, that we get to control via these fancy algorithms. And I think the proof is sort of in the pudding. And I think making this a more of a software optimization and a data problem has been our approach. And that has proven now to be the most effective way of addressing this versus just distributing a bunch of extenders around the home. People think you do that and you're getting sort of a 3-node or 4-node network. That's not what you really get. What oftentimes, if you don't do it right, you put 4 extenders, you get 4 1-node networks, if you know what I mean. That's very different dynamic.
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing about your approach, because there's a lot of, and I know you bristle sometimes when people say, oh, Plume is a mesh routing company, because that is not your vision of the company. I mean, you have a much different version, a much more broader strategic vision of the company. And the fact of the matter is, adaptive Wi-Fi is something that really is a 21st century implementation, because unlike a lot of mesh hardware, and there's some good mesh routers out there, there's some good mesh hardware, a lot of it's kind of set it and forget it. I put it together and, it almost assumes that your usage models it's a one-size-fits-all type of thing. And I think you realized very quickly, it wasn't just about having that one element, great hardware that could connect people's different rooms and extend wireless connectivity to every nook and cranny of the home. But I think you recognized early, especially the fact that you have a cloud implementation to facilitate all this, is that it has to be adaptive, because homes don't have just 1 or 2 people in them. They have lots of different people. The different family members have different usage models. You may have a father now who is working home all the time, and he has an entirely different type of usage model, behavioral pattern than the kid who comes home who wants to play Worlds of Warcraft or Madden football, for that matter, online. And so the fact that the technology is kind of almost like a living, breathing animal, maybe an animal, wrong word, living, breathing entity that that adapts over time to adjust to that individual person's behavior, and the fact that you have tremendous scale, the fact that you have hundreds of thousands of users, that are using these devices with a very broad range of ISPs, and we'll talk about that in a second. That gives you the intelligence and the database to kind of access to help you drive a better experience with users. Correct?
That's correct. So remember your physics days, if you studied physics in school, or for those of us who did, right?
Yes.
Our overall intent is to keep the experience constant, meaning good all of the time, anywhere, every corner of the home, across all of your devices, all of the time. So I'm trying to keep it constant. But we also discussed that the environment is constantly changing, interference devices and so on. So if you have something that's constantly changing, but you apply a fixed solution to it, like you described, set and forget, right? Something that's varying, added to something that's fixed, the end result will vary.
Correct.
Right? So you're going to get an experience. Your Wi-Fi will work sometimes it will not work, because you're setting and forgetting. You're trying to apply a constant solution to a varying problem, right? Plume turned that upside down. We're saying, look, the experiences, the network, the dynamics is constantly changing. We apply a varying response to it. And the sum of the two, let's say, is something something that we want to achieve as a constant, which is the experience, if you know what I mean. So we dynamically respond to the changes. And that's the whole concept of adaptive Wi-Fi. And in terms of scale, you mentioned, it's a lot more than hundreds of thousands. We have about 16 million households that are using our technology today. And we are learning from about 750 million devices now. So we reached 250 million devices, and understanding the behavior and patterns and the network demands of each one of these connected devices, whether it could be your phone or your camera or what have you, it gives us a much broader, much richer data set to be able to turn around and optimize the networks for the specific needs of the devices.
Now, but let's kind of roll the clock back, because your insight was And I'm not even sure a lot of people, I think they get it now. They may not have gotten it 3 or 4 years ago, is that your approach really was take this model, call it a hardware model, cloud model, usage model, and let's go to the ISPs. Because the ISPs, which have been trying to deliver wireless for many, many years, that's been a big, big pain point with most ISPs. I mean, their core competencies has typically been on, creating that, getting that big pipe into your house. But once that pipe got in there, there is all kinds of issues wrapped around, the routers that were being utilized, the expense that ISPs spend on developing hardware that has to be leased back to a user. To a family owner, and I think that most of them would acknowledge that's probably they're not their core competency. And I think you kind of walked in there saying, hey, we have a better way to do things that can promote a better customer experience, allow you to pursue all different types of interesting smart home 2.0 services, which we haven't even talked about yet. We'll talk about a couple of them probably in a few moments. But to me, it was kind of burden relief. If I'm the head of an ISP and you've got some very high profile ISPs in your bonnet, that had to be a completely different take than a lot of the other, router, call it mesh routing companies that were kind of pursuing a few years ago. So I want to talk about the ISP component because that's a pretty big deal of who Plume is.
Right. I mean, 80% of the people in the US and Canada and North America get their connectivity, sort of all of their connectivity experiences from their ISP.
Right.
The ISPs have been around a long time. Some people may not like their ISPs, but a lot of people inevitably go to them. In places like Europe, it's 90% or higher. So we thought, look, this is their domain for the reasons I explained before, because it's the extension of their broadband. ISPs have to own that last 2-meter experience in order to be able to offer additional services and retain their customers. That's the approach we took. We could have easily said, look, my cable company doesn't really do a great job. I'm going to go do it by myself. It's a massive channel. They are big established companies that are sending you a bill every month. So we took the approach of saying, look, yeah, they're not doing it. They didn't do a great job, but let's help them. So we decided to partner with these internet service providers from the beginning, and we continue to do that. And they're getting better at it. And hopefully we're contributing to that, but they're constantly getting better at it. And many of the kind of the in-home Wi-Fi experiences you get now from ISPs, and I would like to say, particularly those who are powered by Plume, your experience is now great. And now internet service providers are saying, now I have this foundational layer. Now I have a very reliable network inside the home, as I did and I do outside of the home. Right. Now I can leverage that to offer all sorts of services on top, whether it's security or parental controls and yada, yada, yada. And those are the kind of services that Plume is continuing to curate, and we deliver them from the same platform in the same cloud. So that's been our approach. We see them as, internet service providers are very strong partners. They are the channel when it comes to the residential play. And that's where we are. And we think partnering with them is
but let me say this. I've known you for a long time. I mean, and I appreciate your humility about it, because you're saying in a very kind of, there's a lot of humility in terms of the way you've been answering this question. But the fact of the matter is, in the middle of this horrific pandemic that the world is suffering from, and there's been this incredible swoosh, of tens of millions of users that are now working at home all over the world, not just the United States, but we can use the U.S. as an example. I was on a call with Comcast not 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about the fact that even despite this incredible increase in work from home users, and there were a lot of people who really thought that the internet infrastructure in the U.S. would collapse, or at least would be under tremendous pressure. And it's because of guys like you, I like to believe, especially because wireless connectivity is such a, up until recently, up until you guys got involved, it was a very, very, it was a pain point for many ISPs. So let's talk a little bit about that, because the good news is, ISPs like Comcast, they really haven't had a hiccup, frankly, in the way they're delivering their services, their internet access to customers. And this has been crucial because, now that you're working at home, you're doing more video conferencing, you're doing the Zoom thing that we're doing right right now. But let's talk a bit about, Plume's role in that, because I really think you guys have been unsung heroes in the way that this has all played out.
We have been working literally behind the scenes, if you will. I don't mean, humans doing things, but our machines, our algorithms. We have seen a tremendous increase in traffic, number of devices that's connected, the amount of interference that comes from your neighbors because now they're at home and they're streaming and they're doing things. The amount of load or the strain in the home Wi-Fi network has exploded by way of the entire work from home movement. Perhaps not surprising. But when you look at the data, what sort of satisfies us is that if Plume was in your home through, whichever ISP you have, we've been doing a lot of things behind, as I mentioned, whether it's, in the context of adaptive Wi-Fi. We're doing a lot more now. There are more optimizations. There are more steering events. There are more channel changes. These are done predictively, preemptively, reactively as well sometimes. So we're doing more. There's a lot more going on, but we've been able to see that the quality of experience for our customers has been equally consistent and great. We can handle multiple Zoom calls, no problem. People have said to me things like, oh yeah, let me turn off my video because my broadband, yada, yada. And I keep saying, look, if you have Plume, it doesn't matter. You
right.
can have, while the kids are watching and screaming, doing this and that or the other, you could be in, far corners of your home and doing a Zoom session when, your wife might be doing the same thing for her work. So we've been doing a lot more, and this kind of goes, I think, to the power of the cloud and this practically infinite amount of compute that's available to us from the cloud. We can crank it up. I don't have to worry about adding more servers, this and that or the other, or worry about the processing power that's sitting on your gateway. We do a lot of things, a lot of the algorithms, the compute cycles we burn is largely in the cloud, and there it's infinite. So we can just scale. We can just hit our Amazon servers with more demand. It is not a problem. And that has in fact happened. And hopefully, we think this is a validation point that taking things up onto the cloud is the right approach. And when we first started doing this about 4 or 5 years ago, many people told us, oh, that's too slow. You can't take things up onto the cloud. You need to do things locally, et cetera, et cetera. And,
you prove them wrong. You prove them wrong. There are two topics I want to hit. This has been fascinating. Two topics I want to address here, though, and something that you've been very, very much involved with, and that is something that's a bit on the esoteric side because it's probably something that a consumer probably wouldn't completely care about, but certainly the ISPs and the other partners that you have care about it. Is that you announced something it was last year, something called OpenSync. And OpenSync is a very, very important piece because OpenSync is this kind of layer that sits on top. It's a cloud-based layer that allows, from my perspective, really gives ISPs an advantage to be able to plug and play different services in a very low effort manner, not an entirely zero effort manner, but it makes life a lot easier for them to deliver different types of services that they can generate revenue for and offer more value to their customers. Let's talk a little bit about OpenSync and why it's so strategic for you folks.
Sure. Simplest way to think about OpenSync is like a SIM card. Think about it as the SIM card that goes into the devices. That SIM card talks to the network. In this case, the network is the Plume cloud. So OpenSync is a device software. It's a framework that enables us to take any hardware, any access point, router, or even client devices, and connect them and be able to control and manage them from the cloud.
Right.
Yeah? This is very, very important. And that piece is a piece of software that we open source. So it's free. Anybody can take it, download it, improve it. There's a BSD3 license attached to it. So if you so wish, you can contribute your changes back to the community. You don't have to, but you can. A lot of people are doing that. The intent of OpenSync was to enable our service providers to scale. And perhaps more importantly, the intent was to enable them to decouple the set of services they're providing from the underlying hardware. In the world of kind of just voice and video services, which has been the bread and butter, beyond internet access, of service providers, your service and your box are one and the same. They say, in order to get this, you have to have this box. Or when they want to launch some new service, oftentimes they have to go upgrade the boxes, or the marketing departments don't like it when the engineers say, yeah, but this model number gateway can handle these services, but the other one doesn't, and the network is 50-50.
Right.
So when these guys in the new world, where the set of services are much greater than just voice, video, and internet connectivity, the winners in this space, we believe, will be the ones who can respond quickly and curate new services and deliver them and manage them and support them faster and better than their competitors. So in this context, OpenSync becomes an important element that decouples their dependency on hardware. So any hardware that is OpenSync enabled can talk to the cloud, and cloud is where all the magic happens. It's the switchboard. It's
right.
the control plane, if you
right.
know what I mean. So OpenSync is on fire at the moment. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of device manufacturers, some silicon SoC providers have taken OpenSync and now offering them as part of their SDKs. Device manufacturers are integrating them as a standard part of their offering, because the service providers are looking for services. They're no longer looking for boxes that will give me voice or video. So it's beyond how many voice ports you have and how much video you can stream to the remote set-top box. It's much more complex now with parental control, security, motion, adaptive Wi-Fi, et cetera, energy management. There are many, many other services that people want to offer inside the smart home. And OpenSync, we think, is a key enabler of that entire movement.
Well, and let's talk about it, because you mentioned it very quickly while you were giving me your answer, is that one of the big announcements you've had over the last few months that you made back in at CES. God, that seems like 100 years ago, when you have a very strong partnership with Cognitive Systems, who's out of Canada, and you've worked with them on delivering BlueMotion, which is really incredible. It's got tremendous potential. I want you to talk about it in terms of the ability to sense motion in homes using the existing wireless devices people already have in their home. So let's talk about that, because obviously, under normal, motion sensing is not new. There's been a lot of, other ways of doing it. But the interesting way, you working with Cognitive Systems, is you've been able to deploy this in such a way that it's, compatible with Plume hardware. It works with all the different wireless devices that are in people's homes, and the potential for all different types of really interesting applications with usage models that, frankly, are just not possible right now with today's existing hardware. It's now achievable. So let's talk a little bit about BlueMotion, because I do think it's a big deal.
We think it'll be a big deal. It is a piece of technology that I personally was not so sure of at the beginning, that I have become to love, because it works. It's the technology simply using Wi-Fi, RF waves and signals. We can detect whether there's motion in the house, and in fact, where in the house it is. We can distinguish between pets and people. So many people are imagining all sorts of applications and use cases around this. I think of it as a very interesting trigger to trigger certain actions. It could be person detection, whether it's around elderly care or energy management or what have you around the house. So we launched this. The technology works quite well. We want to live with it for the next, we launched it back in February, announced it in January, launched it in February. We want to live with it through kind of the next, let's say, 6 months or so, and see what people think about it and really hone in on the technology. I do think this is going to be, we have a number of use cases in mind. There are a lot of things one can do with this. But the interesting part of it is there is no additional piece of hardware. You don't have to put these sensors or anything else
on the walls, right? Correct.
Your access points are sensors, as well as the devices. So as you add more and more devices in your home, they become sensors themselves. So more devices you have, higher the resolution and so on. So that's an interesting piece of technology we're seeing, and we have one of our partners is this company Cognitive, as a, they're a technology provider. That is also a proof point of this kind of the open platform approach we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can think of the Plume cloud as the sort of the home app store in a way. And we can plug in these technologies where their core algorithms runs on their cloud, and we're talking their cloud and our cloud talks to each other, and we can feed the information back and forth. So that's another proof point for us that we can also, Plume doesn't have to be the curator of our own services. Other people can build on top of the Plume consumer experience management platform, we call it.
Right.
So that's another interesting element. And there are a number of other people, including some of our customers, who are building their own applications on our platform.
Right. Well, I have to say, I share your enthusiasm for it. I think it's going to be an interesting application. I just think that in the kind of world we're operating in right now with COVID-19, the whole idea of people are really getting gun shy of being trapped in their homes and not knowing what's happening with their elderly parents, their children who might be remote. And even at a baseline standpoint, the technology is interesting because it can provide alerts to people saying, hey, your parents woke up in the morning and they just walked out of their bedroom, and knowing that alert is a refreshing piece of data that you didn't have access to before. So there's all kinds of interesting applications for this. This has really been fascinating, and I'm glad we got a chance to speak to you, Fahri, this morning. And in fact, I just noticed, and I think you've had it in place for a bit of time right now. Even if you don't have an ISP that offers the Plume capability, although that list is now getting shorter and shorter because you've got so many partnerships with most of the big ISPs, you have a COVID-19 special on your website, which is really great. So if you want to get access to your hardware, you have that available on your website, correct? You have
That's right. It's people can come. Plume is a subscription service. Normally you pay $99 a year. That comes with one piece of SuperPod, and then you can buy as many as you'd like if you have a large home and all of that. So in response to COVID-19, we're giving people an opportunity to get access to the service at half the price effectively. There is a $50 discount per year.
To me, it's a great deal. It's a great deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are working from home, and this is kind of a core piece of what everybody's trying to do.
Well, I think it's a great thing on the behalf of Plume. But Fahri, thank you for your time. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to see each other when you leave the comfy confines of your home in. I guess your part-time home now in Switzerland, where you are right now. And I really do appreciate your time, and thanks again for joining us. Please join us for the next podcast next week. Please follow more insights and strategy on our usual social media partners, suspect partners. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And until next time, have a great week. Thanks again, Fahri.
Thank you, Mark.